Before anyone knew what he did, he had already rehearsed the murder in his mind. No body, no evidence, no pregnancy to expose his crime. To him, the car crusher was the perfect solution. Mechanical, fast, untraceable. This story begins not with the victim found alive, but with the moment he decided she couldn't be allowed to live. The scrapyard was just the final step. The horror started long before then. Welcome to True Crime Story HQ. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe. Ezekiel Thompson was the kind of man people described as dependable. At 38, he had a steady job at a logistics warehouse, a modest apartment on the east side of town, and a reputation for being the family member who showed up when others didn't. He never missed a birthday. He never forgot to call his younger sister on holidays, and when things got hard for her, he was the first to offer help. His younger sister, Winifred Dawson, was 34 and trying to hold her life together with both hands. 3 years earlier, her husband Calvin had died in a warehouse fire. It happened on a Tuesday morning during his shift at a distribution center across town. A storage unit collapsed during a routine inventory check, trapping him beneath burning pallets stacked 3 levels high. The flames spread faster than anyone anticipated. By the time firefighters broke through the main entrance and located him in the back section, smoke inhalation had already done its damage. Calvin Dawson was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 32 years old. Winifred was left to raise their 2 children alone, Pearl, who was 13 at the time, and Destiny, who was only 6. The grief didn't fade with time. It settled into the walls of their small house, clinging to everything like smoke that wouldn't clear. Some mornings, Winifred woke up and forgot Calvin was gone. She'd turn over in bed, expecting to see him there, only to find empty sheets and the crushing reality that he wasn't coming back. But grief didn't pay bills. Grief didn't put food on the table or keep the lights on. Winifred worked as a hospital aide at County General, pulling double shifts just to make ends meet. She left before sunrise most mornings and came home after dark. The mortgage was always 2 weeks behind. The car needed repairs she couldn't afford. Pearl needed new shoes. Destiny needed school supplies. Every month felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, one mistake away from falling. When Ezekiel offered to help, Winifred felt a wave of relief she hadn't experienced in years. He was her older brother, the one who had looked out for her when they were kids growing up in a rough neighborhood on the south side. He said he could pick Pearl up from school on days when Winifred's shift ran late. He said he could drive her to after-school activities, help her with homework, keep an eye on her while Winifred worked. It seemed like a blessing, a break from the exhaustion that had become her daily existence. Winifred trusted him. Why wouldn't she? He was family. He had always been protective of her. When she was younger and boys tried to bother her at school, Ezekiel was the one who stepped in. When their father left and their mother struggled to raise them alone, Ezekiel was the one who made sure Winifred had what she needed. He was responsible, reliable, safe. But what Winifred didn't see, what she couldn't see, was the way her brother looked at Pearl when no one else was watching, the way his eyes lingered a little too long, the way he found excuses to be alone with her, the way he positioned himself as someone Pearl could depend on, while slowly separating her from everyone else in her life. Pearl was a quiet girl. She kept to herself most of the time, her nose buried in books, or her headphones plugged in as she walked through the hallways at school. She had a small circle of friends, girls she'd known since middle school, but even they noticed she was pulling away. She stopped responding to group chats. She stopped showing up to hang out after school. When they asked her what was wrong, she just shrugged and said she was tired. Her friends didn't push. Teenagers drift apart sometimes. That's just how it goes. But Pearl wasn't drifting. She was being pulled. It started with small things. A $20 bill slipped into her hand when they stopped for gas. "Don't tell your mom," Ezekiel would say with a wink. "Just a little something extra for yourself." Then it was gifts, a new phone case, a pair of sneakers she'd mentioned wanting, a jacket she saw at the mall but knew her mother couldn't afford. Each time, Ezekiel made sure Pearl understood that he was paying attention. He made sure she felt special, seen, valued in a way she hadn't felt since her father died. He told her things her mother didn't have time to say. "You're so mature for your age," he'd tell her during car rides home from school. "Most girls your age are still acting like kids, worrying about drama and boys. But you get it. You understand how the world works." He made her feel older than she was. He made her feel like she was on his level, like they shared something her mother and brother couldn't understand. He asked her questions about her life, about her feelings, about what she wanted for her future. He listened when she talked about school stress or friend problems. He offered advice. He made her laugh. He became the person she turned to when things felt overwhelming. And slowly, without Pearl realizing it, he became the only person she felt comfortable talking to. He isolated her piece by piece. He'd suggest she skip hanging out with friends because they don't really get you anyway. He'd tell her that her mother was too stressed and overworked to handle her problems, so it was better to talk to him instead. He positioned himself as the safe place, the one person who wouldn't judge her, the one adult in her life who truly understood what she was going through. Pearl didn't recognize the manipulation for what it was. She was 16. She thought he was being kind. She thought he cared. And in her world, a world where her father was dead, her mother was barely home, and her friends were drifting away, Ezekiel's attention felt like the only stable thing she had. But Ezekiel knew exactly what he was doing. Every gift, every compliment, every private conversation, every moment he spent building her trust was part of a pattern he had perfected over time. He was grooming her, conditioning her to depend on him, preparing her for something she couldn't yet comprehend. And by the time Pearl realized something was wrong, it would already be too late. As this story continues, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who values real, powerful storytelling. Your support is what keeps this channel alive and helps us bring more true crime stories like this to light. Now, let's continue. It was a Friday evening in late September, the kind of evening where the air still held the warmth of summer, but the sun set a little earlier each day, reminding everyone that fall was coming. Winifred had just clocked in for her second shift at the hospital when she got a call from Pearl. Her daughter sounded frustrated. She had left her biology textbook at home, and she needed it for a group study session happening after the school's football game that night. Pearl's midterm was coming up, and she couldn't afford to miss the review. Winifred felt the familiar stab of guilt that came with working 2 shifts back to back. She couldn't leave work. She couldn't drive home and bring the book herself. But she also couldn't let Pearl fail her exam because of a forgotten textbook. So she did what she'd been doing for months. She called Ezekiel. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Winnie, what's up?" "I hate to ask," Winifred said, already apologizing. "But Pearl left her biology book at home and she needs it tonight. I'm stuck at work. Could you—" "Say no more," Ezekiel interrupted. "I'll grab it and drop it off at the school. No problem." Winifred exhaled. "Thank you. Seriously, I owe you." "You don't owe me anything," Ezekiel said. "That's what family's for." Ezekiel arrived at Winifred's house around 6:30 p.m. Pearl was sitting on the front steps with her backpack, scrolling through her phone. When she saw his truck pull up, she grabbed the textbook from inside and walked over. She climbed into the passenger seat without saying much. She was used to this by now, her uncle picking her up, driving her places, filling the gaps her mother couldn't. The sun was starting to set, casting long orange and pink streaks across the sky. Pearl assumed they were heading straight to the school. She texted a friend from her study group, letting her know she'd be there in 10 minutes. But when she looked up, she noticed Ezekiel had turned onto a road she didn't recognize. "This isn't the way to school," she said, glancing at him. Ezekiel smiled. "I know, I just need to make a quick stop first. Won't take long." Pearl felt a flicker of unease but didn't say anything. He was her uncle. He had driven her places 100 times before. She told herself it was fine. Maybe he needed gas. Maybe he had to pick something up. It wasn't a big deal. But then he turned into the parking lot of an abandoned strip mall on the outskirts of town. The buildings were boarded up, covered in graffiti tags that had been there for years. Weeds pushed through cracks in the pavement. There were no other cars, no streetlights, no people, just empty storefronts in the fading light of the setting sun. "Why are we here?" Pearl asked, her voice tighter now. "Relax," Ezekiel said, putting the truck in park. "I just wanted to talk to you for a minute. Away from everyone else, away from the noise." He reached into the back seat and pulled out a bottle of soda, one of those glass bottles you get from specialty stores. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "I stopped earlier and grabbed this for you. Thought you'd be thirsty." Pearl stared at the bottle. Something felt wrong. She couldn't name it, but it was there. A crawling sensation at the back of her neck, a tightness in her chest. But she also didn't know how to say no. She had been taught not to question adults. She had been taught to be polite, to not make a scene. So she took the bottle and unscrewed the cap. The soda tasted off. Slightly bitter. Like it had been sitting in the sun too long or mixed with something that didn't belong. She made a face and set it down in the cup holder. "What's wrong?" Ezekiel asked, watching her. "Nothing," Pearl said quickly. "It just tastes weird." "You probably just need to drink more water," he said. "You're always dehydrated. Your mom told me you never drink enough." Pearl didn't argue. She took another sip, trying to ignore the strange aftertaste that lingered on her tongue. Within minutes, her head started to feel heavy. The edges of her vision blurred like someone had smeared Vaseline over a camera lens. Her tongue felt thick in her mouth. She tried to say something, but the words came out slurred and broken, like her brain and her mouth weren't connected anymore. I don't feel good," she mumbled, reaching for the door handle. Her fingers wouldn't cooperate. Her hand slipped off the handle. Her body felt like it was sinking into the seat, like gravity had doubled and she couldn't fight it. "Hey, it's okay," Ezekiel said, his voice soft and reassuring. "You're just tired. You've been working so hard in school. Just close your eyes for a minute. You'll feel better." Pearl tried to shake her head, but her neck wouldn't move. Her vision doubled. The world tilted sideways, and then everything went black. When she woke up, she was in her own bed. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the streetlight outside her window. Her head throbbed like someone had taken a hammer to her skull. Her body ached in ways she didn't understand. Deep, bruising pain that radiated through her limbs and settled in places she couldn't name. She tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea knocked her back down onto the pillow. She stared at the ceiling, trying to piece together what had happened. She remembered getting into Ezekiel's truck. She remembered drinking the soda. She remembered feeling dizzy and wrong. But everything after that was a blank, a void, a missing chunk of time she couldn't account for. She rolled onto her side and saw bruises on her arms, dark purple marks shaped like fingers. Someone had grabbed her, hard. She pulled her blanket tighter around herself, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. She didn't tell her mother. She didn't tell anyone. The shame was too heavy. The confusion was too overwhelming. Part of her wanted to believe she had imagined it. Maybe she had just fallen asleep. Maybe nothing had happened. Maybe she was overreacting. But deep down, in the part of her that couldn't be lied to, she knew. She knew something terrible had been done to her, and she knew who had done it. Over the next few weeks, Pearl tried to go back to normal. She went to school. She did her homework. She sat at the dinner table with her mother and brother and pretended everything was fine. But she avoided Ezekiel. When he offered to pick her up, she made excuses. When he texted her, she didn't respond. When he asked if something was wrong, she said she was just busy with schoolwork. She built walls around herself, trying to protect what little sense of safety she had left. But the walls couldn't stop what was already growing inside her. 6 weeks later, she realized something was deeply wrong. She had missed her period. Then another. She felt nauseous in the mornings, a sick, twisting feeling that wouldn't go away no matter what she ate or didn't eat. Her body felt different, foreign, like it didn't belong to her anymore. A friend from school, a girl named Jasmine who noticed Pearl looked pale and exhausted, helped her buy a pregnancy test from a drugstore on the other side of town where no one would recognize them. They went into the gas station bathroom together, and Pearl locked herself in a stall with shaking hands. She unwrapped the test and followed the instructions printed on the box. 2 lines. Positive. Pearl stared at the test for a long time, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. She was 16 years old. She was pregnant. And she knew exactly who was responsible. She told her mother a week later. Not the full truth. She couldn't bring herself to say the words out loud, but enough. She said she had been seeing someone. She said it was a mistake. She said she was scared and didn't know what to do. Winifred didn't yell. She didn't judge. She held her daughter while Pearl cried into her shoulder, her whole body shaking with sobs she'd been holding in for weeks. "We'll figure this out together," Winifred whispered. "I promise. We'll figure it out." But before Winifred could ask more questions, before Pearl could find the courage to say Ezekiel's name out loud, Destiny overheard his sister crying. The 9-year-old boy didn't understand what was happening, but he knew Pearl was upset. And during a phone call with Ezekiel a few days later, Destiny mentioned it in passing. "Pearl's been really sad lately," he said. "Mom said something about a baby. I don't know what that means." Ezekiel's blood ran cold. He knew exactly what it meant. And he knew his life was about to fall apart unless he did something to stop it. Ezekiel sat in his apartment that night, staring at the wall across from his couch. The TV was on, some late-night talk show he wasn't watching. His mind raced through every possible outcome, every scenario, every consequence. If Pearl kept the baby, there would be questions. Doctors would run tests. DNA would be collected. And when the results came back, they would point directly to him. Prison. That was the first thing he thought about. Not just jail, prison, real hard time, years behind bars, decades maybe. He'd heard stories about what happened to men like him inside. Child predators didn't last long. They got beaten, stabbed, worse. Even if he survived, his life would be over. Then there was his family. Winifred would never forgive him. She'd see him for what he really was. The rest of the family would turn their backs. His mother, if she were still alive, would have disowned him. His name would be dragged through the mud. His face would be on the news. Neighbors would recognize him. Co-workers would whisper. He'd lose his job, his apartment, everything. He didn't consider confessing. He didn't consider facing what he had done. He didn't consider the possibility of taking responsibility, of trying to make things right in whatever limited way he could. His mind didn't go there. It went somewhere else entirely. If Pearl wasn't around to identify him, if the pregnancy disappeared, if there was no body and no evidence, then there would be no case, no investigation, no trial, no prison. It would be as if none of it had ever happened. He could go back to his life. He could move on. The idea should have horrified him. But instead, it felt like a solution, a way out, the only way out. He sat there for hours, his mind turning over the problem like a puzzle he needed to solve. How do you make someone disappear without a trace? How do you destroy evidence so completely that no one could ever prove what happened? The answer came to him 2 days later while he was at work. He was standing in the warehouse watching a forklift move pallets of inventory when his supervisor mentioned something about a guy who used to work there. "Yeah, he left about 5 years ago," the supervisor said. "Went to work at some scrapyard. Said the pay was better. Don't know how anyone could stand that job, though. Crushing cars all day, watching them get flattened into nothing." Crushing cars. Flattened into nothing. The words stuck in Ezekiel's mind. He went home that night and started researching. He typed "car crusher" into the search bar and watched videos of the machines in action. Massive hydraulic presses that compressed entire vehicles into blocks of scrap metal. Cars went in whole and came out as compact cubes, unrecognizable, ready to be melted down and recycled. No body, no evidence, just metal. The more he watched, the more the idea took shape. If he could get Pearl into one of those cars before it was crushed, if he could make sure she was unconscious and couldn't escape, the machine would do the rest. It would be quick. It would be complete. And there would be nothing left to investigate. He started planning immediately. Ezekiel had always been methodical. At work, he was the guy who double-checked inventory lists and reorganized shelves when they got messy. He didn't like chaos. He liked things neat, predictable, under control. So when he decided Pearl needed to disappear, he approached it the same way he approached everything else, with a plan. He started researching scrapyards. He spent hours on his laptop at night, looking up salvage yards in the surrounding counties. He read reviews. He studied their operations. He looked at satellite images on Google Maps to see how they were laid out. He needed a place that was busy enough that one more car wouldn't raise questions, but not so busy that people would be watching every move. He found Hartley's Auto Salvage 40 miles outside the city. It was a sprawling yard filled with rows and rows of wrecked cars waiting to be crushed and sold for scrap metal. The owner ran a no-frills operation. Cash transactions. Minimal paperwork. Not many questions. The crusher ran almost every day, flattening cars into compact blocks that got hauled off by the truckload. Perfect. Ezekiel drove out there on a Saturday afternoon, pretending he was looking for a part for his truck. He walked around the yard, noting where the crusher was located, how the cars were arranged, where the security cameras were positioned. There weren't many cameras. The ones that were there were old and pointed at the main office, not the crusher area. He timed how long it would take to drive from his apartment to the yard. 42 minutes if he took back roads and avoided highways. He went back a second time the following weekend, this time in the evening when the light was fading. He wanted to see what the yard looked like at night, when fewer people were around. He noted which cars were tagged for crushing. He found a rusted 1998 Ford Taurus sitting in the corner of the lot, its windshield cracked, its hood dented. A piece of paper taped to the driver's side window said, "Crush, no owner." Perfect. No one would miss it. No one would ask questions. He took photos with his phone, making sure to capture the layout, the location of the Taurus, the path he would need to take. He studied those photos every night for a week, memorizing every detail. Next, he needed a way to incapacitate Pearl. He couldn't risk a struggle. He couldn't risk her screaming or fighting back or running. He needed something strong enough to knock her out completely. Something that would work fast. He turned to the internet. Not the regular internet. The hidden parts. The dark web. He'd heard about it from a coworker years ago, someone who bragged about buying things you couldn't get legally. Ezekiel spent a week learning how to access it, how to use cryptocurrency, how to stay anonymous. He watched tutorials on encrypted browsers. He read forums about digital security. He created accounts under fake names. He learned how to cover his tracks. He finally found a vendor selling Rohypnol, roofies. The listing said the pills were pharmaceutical grade, strong enough to knock someone out for hours. The vendor had positive reviews from other buyers. Ezekiel read through the feedback carefully, making sure this was legitimate. He paid with Bitcoin he'd been slowly accumulating over the past couple of years. Small purchases here and there, nothing that would raise red flags. He transferred the cryptocurrency to the vendor's digital wallet and waited. The transaction was encrypted, untraceable, or so he believed. The package arrived 9 days later in unmarked packaging with no return address. Inside were 20 small white pills in a Ziploc bag. Ezekiel examined them carefully, comparing them to images he'd found online. They looked right. He stored them in a locked drawer in his bedroom, hidden beneath old tax documents and insurance paperwork. Then he focused on timing. He needed rain, lots of it. Rain would wash away fingerprints. Thunder would mask any sounds. Muddy ground would obscure tire tracks. He checked weather forecasts obsessively, refreshing the page multiple times a day. He watched radar patterns. He studied storm systems moving across the country. He needed a storm, a big one. While he waited, he scouted Hartley's salvage a third time. He memorized the layout. He knew exactly where he would park. He knew which path he would take to the Taurus. He knew how long it would take to carry someone from his truck to that car. He timed it. 3 minutes if he moved quickly. 5 if he was careful. He went to a hardware store 30 miles away, far enough that no one would recognize him. He bought duct tape, nylon rope, and plastic sheeting. He paid in cash. He kept his head down. He avoided eye contact with the cashier. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face and sunglasses even though it was overcast outside. Back at his apartment, he tested the rope to make sure it was strong enough. He practiced tying knots that wouldn't slip. He unrolled the duct tape and tore off strips, testing how sticky they were, how much noise they made. He needed to be efficient. He needed to be fast. He rehearsed his alibi over and over in his mind. He would say he was home watching a game. His neighbor, an older man named Mr. Carver who rarely left his apartment, could verify. He was there if anyone asked. Ezekiel made a point of being extra friendly to Mr. Carver over the next week, waving when he saw him in the hallway, offering to help carry his groceries, making small talk about the weather. He wanted to be memorable. He wanted Mr. Carver to remember seeing him that week. He thought about what he would say if the police came asking questions. He would act shocked, concerned. He would offer to help search for Pearl. He would volunteer to print flyers, to drive around looking for her. He would be the worried uncle doing everything he could to bring his niece home safely. Everything made sense in his mind. Every piece fit together. Every risk had been accounted for. Every detail had been thought through. He wasn't thinking about Pearl as a person. He wasn't thinking about the girl he had watched grow up. The girl who used to call him Uncle Zeke when she was little. The girl who trusted him. He was thinking about himself, his freedom, his survival. He went over the plan again and again, looking for holes, looking for mistakes. He couldn't afford to overlook anything. He couldn't afford to leave evidence behind. He played out every scenario. What if someone saw his truck at the scrapyard? He would take back roads. What if Pearl woke up too soon? He would use enough drugs to keep her unconscious for hours. What if the crusher didn't run the next day? He would check the schedule. He would make sure the timing was right. Days passed, then a week, then 2 weeks. Ezekiel watched the weather obsessively. He had everything ready: the drugs, the rope, the tape, the knowledge of exactly where to go and what to do. He just needed the right conditions. He needed cover. He needed a storm that would keep people inside, that would wash away his tracks, that would give him the darkness and noise he needed to disappear without being seen. He checked the forecast multiple times every day. Clear skies, partly cloudy, light rain. Nothing strong enough. Nothing that would work. And then finally, the forecast changed. A major storm system was forming, expected to roll through the area in the coming days. Heavy rain, thunder, possible flooding. The kind of storm that kept people indoors. The kind of storm that washed everything clean. Ezekiel stared at the screen, his heart pounding. This was it. This was his window. Everything was ready. Everything was in place. Now all he had to do was wait for the storm to arrive and then make his move. Ezekiel called in sick to work the next morning, telling his supervisor he had food poisoning and couldn't come in. His supervisor, a man named Doug who never questioned anyone's sick days, just told him to feel better and hung up. Ezekiel spent the morning preparing. He crushed 3 Rohypnol pills into a fine powder, using the back of a spoon against his kitchen counter. He mixed the powder into a bottle of water, shaking it until the white specks dissolved completely. He held the bottle up to the light, checking for any visible residue. Nothing. It looked like regular water. He loaded the duct tape, rope, and plastic sheeting into the back seat of his truck, covering them with an old blanket so they wouldn't be visible if anyone looked through the windows. He checked his phone repeatedly, watching the radar. The storm was moving in right on schedule. Dark green and red patches spread across the map, indicating heavy rain and strong winds. Perfect. At 6:15 p.m. he made the call. Pearl's phone rang 4 times before she answered. Hello? Her voice was quiet, cautious. She had been avoiding him for weeks, and they both knew it. Hey, Pearl, Ezekiel said, keeping his tone light and casual. Your mom just called me. She's stuck at work and can't get away. The storm's getting bad, and she doesn't want you walking home in this weather. She asked if I could come pick you up. There was a pause on the other end. Ezekiel held his breath. If she said no, if she made an excuse, the whole plan would fall apart. "Okay," Pearl finally said. "I'll be ready in 10 minutes." Ezekiel exhaled slowly. "Great. I'll be there soon." He hung up and stared at his phone for a moment. This was it. The point of no return. He could still back out. He could still stop this before it went any further. But the thought of prison, of his life being destroyed, of everyone knowing what he had done, it pushed him forward. He grabbed his keys and walked out the door. The drive to Pearl's school took 15 minutes. By the time he pulled into the parking lot, the rain was coming down in sheets, so thick he could barely see 10 feet in front of him. Thunder rumbled overhead, low and threatening. Pearl was standing under the awning near the main entrance, her backpack clutched to her chest, her hood pulled up against the rain. When she saw his truck, she jogged over and climbed into the passenger seat. "Thanks for picking me up," she said, not looking at him. She kept her eyes on her lap, her hands gripping the straps of her backpack. "No problem," Ezekiel said. He put the truck in drive and pulled out of the parking lot. "Your mom worries about you. You know that." Pearl didn't respond. She just stared out the window at the rain streaking down the glass. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Ezekiel took the main road heading south, away from Pearl's neighborhood. She didn't seem to notice at first. She was lost in her own thoughts. Her body turned slightly toward the door, as far from him as the seat would allow. After about 5 minutes, Ezekiel reached behind his seat and grabbed the bottle of water he had prepared. "Here," he said, holding it out to her. "You look pale. Drink something. It'll help." Pearl glanced at the bottle, then at him. "I'm okay." "Come on," Ezekiel said, his voice gentle, almost fatherly. "You barely ate lunch today, did you? Your mom told me you've been skipping meals. Just drink a little. You'll feel better." Pearl hesitated, then took the bottle. She unscrewed the cap and took a small sip. The water tasted normal. Clean. Cold. She took another sip, then set the bottle in the cup holder between them. "Better?" Ezekiel asked. "Yeah," Pearl said quietly. They drove for another few minutes. Pearl started to feel strange. At first, it was just a faint heaviness in her limbs, like she hadn't slept well the night before. Then her vision started to blur at the edges. The streetlights outside looked softer, like they were wrapped in fog. She blinked, trying to clear her head. "I don't feel good," she mumbled, pressing her hand against her forehead. "You're probably just tired," Ezekiel said. "Close your eyes for a minute. We'll be home soon." But they weren't heading home. Pearl realized that through the growing fog in her mind. She tried to focus on the road, on the landmarks passing by, but everything looked unfamiliar. Wrong. "Where are we going?" she asked, her words slurring slightly. "Just taking a shortcut," Ezekiel said. "The main road's flooded. Don't worry." Pearl tried to argue, tried to say something, but her tongue felt thick and useless in her mouth. Her eyelids were so heavy, she couldn't keep them open. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the rain hammering against the windshield and the dark, empty fields on either side of the road. Ezekiel glanced over at her. Her head had fallen back against the seat, her mouth slightly open, her chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. He reached over and checked her pulse at her wrist. Strong. Regular. Good. The drugs were working exactly as they were supposed to. He kept driving, taking back roads to avoid traffic cameras and busy intersections. The rain was relentless, turning the dirt roads into rivers of mud. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it rattled the windows of the truck. Lightning lit up the sky in jagged bursts, illuminating the empty landscape around them. Ezekiel drove carefully, keeping his speed steady, his hands gripping the wheel. He couldn't afford to get pulled over. He couldn't afford any mistakes. After 40 minutes, he reached Hartley's Auto Salvage. The gate was open, just as it always was. The owner didn't bother locking it at night. There was nothing worth stealing, and the yard was too far out of town for anyone to stumble across it by accident. Ezekiel drove through the gate, and followed the dirt path that wound through rows of crushed and mangled cars. The crusher was at the back of the yard, a massive machine that looked like something out of an industrial nightmare. It was quiet now, shut down for the night, but Ezekiel knew it would be running again in the morning. He parked next to the 1998 Ford Taurus he had scouted weeks earlier. The car sat alone in a corner of the yard, its windows shattered, its tires flat, a piece of paper taped to the driver's side window that read, "Crush no owner," in faded black marker. Ezekiel turned off his truck and sat there for a moment, listening to the rain pounding on the roof. His heart was racing, his hands were shaking. This was real. This was happening. He took a deep breath, opened his door, and stepped out into the rain. The cold hit him immediately, soaking through his jacket in seconds. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the door. Pearl was still unconscious, her body limp and unresponsive. He reached in and lifted her out of the seat, cradling her in his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile in a way that made him pause for just a second. But only a second. He carried her to the Taurus and opened the back door. The interior smelled like mold and rust and old cigarettes. He laid Pearl across the back seat, adjusting her position so she was lying flat. Then he went back to his truck and grabbed the rope and duct tape. He worked quickly, his hands moving with a strange, detached efficiency. He tied her wrists together with the nylon rope, wrapping it tight enough that she wouldn't be able to slip free, but not so tight that it would cut off circulation. He didn't want her to wake up in pain. He just wanted her to not wake up at all. Then he tore off a long strip of duct tape and pressed it firmly over her mouth, sealing her lips completely. He smoothed the edges down, making sure it wouldn't come loose. He checked her pulse one more time. Still there. Still steady. He stepped back and looked at her, this girl he had known since she was a baby, this girl who had trusted him, this girl who was now lying unconscious in the back of a rusted car that would be crushed into a block of metal in a few hours. He felt nothing, no guilt, no remorse, just relief that it would all be over soon. He closed the door and locked it. He walked back to his truck, got in, and started the engine. He sat there for a moment, staring at the Taurus through the rain-streaked windshield. Then he put the truck in reverse and drove away. The drive back to town felt longer than the drive out. Ezekiel kept checking his rearview mirror, half expecting to see flashing lights behind him. But there was nothing. Just rain and darkness and empty roads. He stopped at a gas station about 10 miles from the scrapyard. He went inside, bought a bottle of Gatorade and a bag of chips, and paid with cash. The cashier barely looked at him, too focused on the small TV mounted behind the counter. The receipt printed out with a timestamp, 8:47 p.m. Ezekiel folded it carefully and slipped it into his wallet. By the time he got home, it was after 9:30. He parked his truck in his usual spot, grabbed his keys, and walked up to his apartment. Inside, he stripped off his wet clothes and threw them in the washing machine. He took a long, hot shower, scrubbing the rain and mud and guilt, or what should have been guilt, off his skin. When he got out, he put on clean clothes, made himself a sandwich, and turned on the TV. A basketball game was playing. He didn't care about basketball, but he left it on. Anyway, he needed the noise. He needed the distraction. He sat on his couch and ate his sandwich and told himself that everything was fine. Pearl was gone. The evidence was gone. No one would ever know. The rain had been falling for hours, and it showed no signs of stopping. At Hartley's Auto Salvage, the night shift operator, Darnell Hughes, stood under the small awning attached to the main office, smoking a cigarette and watching the storm. Darnell was 52 years old, a big man with broad shoulders and hands rough from years of manual labor. He had worked at the scrapyard for nearly 20 years, operating the crusher that turned cars into compact blocks of metal. It was hard, dirty work, but it paid the bills. Tonight, though, the work had been frustrating. The rain had turned the yard into a swamp. The crusher was temperamental on a good day, but when the metal was wet, the hydraulics struggled. Cars slipped. The machine stalled. It took twice as long to get anything done. Darnell and his co-worker, a younger guy named Evan, had already postponed several crushes because of the conditions. They'd deal with them in the morning when the rain let up. Darnell finished his cigarette and flicked the butt into a puddle. He glanced at his watch. 10:15 p.m. Another hour and his shift would be over. He could go home, take a hot shower, and sleep for 10 hours straight. The thought made him feel a little better. He walked back into the office where Evan was sitting at a desk, scrolling through his phone. "I'm gonna do one more crush before I call it," Darnell said. "That Taurus in the back corner. It's been sitting there for weeks." Evan looked up. "You sure? The rain's not letting up?" "I know," Darnell said. "But if I don't get it done tonight, the boss is going to be on my ass tomorrow. Won't take long." Evan shrugged. "Your call, man." Darnell grabbed his rain jacket and headed back out into the storm. He walked across the muddy yard, his boots sinking into the soft ground with every step. The Taurus was parked near the crusher, exactly where it had been for the past 2 weeks. Darnell had seen it 100 times, but he'd never paid much attention to it. Just another piece of junk waiting to be destroyed. He climbed into the cab of the crusher and fired up the engine. The machine rumbled to life, its hydraulic arms extending like the limbs of some giant mechanical insect. Darnell maneuvered the arms into position, lowering them toward the Taurus. The plan was simple. Grab the car, lift it into the crusher, and flatten it. 5 minutes tops. But then he heard something. At first he thought it was the wind, or maybe a piece of metal scraping against another piece of metal. But then he heard it again, louder this time. A sound that didn't belong. A sound that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It was a scream. Darnell froze. His hand hovered over the controls. He listened, straining to hear over the noise of the rain and the engine. There it was again. Faint, muffled, but unmistakable. Someone was screaming. He shut off the crusher and climbed down from the cab. His heart was pounding. He walked toward the Taurus, his boots splashing through puddles. The sound was coming from inside the car. He pressed his face against the window and peered inside. It was too dark to see anything clearly, but he could make out a shape in the back seat. Something moving. "What the hell?" Darnell muttered. He grabbed the handle and pulled, but the door was locked. He tried the other doors. All locked. The screaming continued, growing louder, more desperate. Darnell ran back to the office. "Evan, get out here. There's something in the car." Evan looked up, confused. "What are you talking about?" "There's someone in the damn car," Darnell shouted. "Come on." Evan jumped up and followed Darnell back to the Taurus. By the time they got there, the screaming had stopped, replaced by a horrible, choking sound. Darnell grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox near the crusher and jammed it into the door frame. He pried the door open with a loud screech of metal on metal. The smell hit him first. Rust and mold and something else, something human. He pulled the door open wide and shone his flashlight into the back seat. What he saw made him stumble backward. A girl, a teenage girl. She was lying on her side, her hands bound with rope, her mouth covered with duct tape. Her eyes were wide with terror, tears streaming down her face. She was soaking wet, shivering violently, her clothes clinging to her body. And she was pregnant. Even through the dim light and the rain, Darnell could see the swell of her belly. "Oh my God," Evan whispered. Darnell climbed into the car and carefully peeled the duct tape off the girl's mouth. She gasped for air, coughing and sobbing at the same time. "Help me," she choked out. "Please help me." "It's okay," Darnell said, his voice shaking. "It's okay. We got you. You're safe now." He cut the rope around her wrists with a pocket knife and helped her sit up. She was trembling so hard she could barely hold herself upright. Evan called 911, his hands shaking as he tried to dial. "There's a girl here," Evan said into the phone. "At Hartley's Auto Salvage. She's hurt. She's tied up. Someone tried to kill her. We need an ambulance. Now." Darnell wrapped his jacket around the girl's shoulders and helped her out of the car. She collapsed against him, her legs too weak to support her weight. "Who did this to you?" he asked gently. "My uncle," she whispered. "My uncle did this." Darnell felt his stomach turn. He looked at Evan, who had gone pale. "Stay with her," Darnell said. I'm going to get some blankets from the office. He ran back to the office, grabbed every blanket and towel he could find, and brought them back to the girl. By the time the ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, she was wrapped in 3 layers of blankets, still shivering, still crying, but alive. The paramedics loaded her onto a stretcher and rushed her to the hospital. Darnell stood in the rain, watching the ambulance disappear down the road, its red lights flashing in the darkness. He looked at the Taurus, at the open door, at the rope and duct tape still lying on the seat. "Someone tried to kill her," Evan said, his voice hollow. "They put her in that car and left her to die." Darnell didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at the car, trying to process what had just happened. If he had started the crusher 5 minutes earlier, if he hadn't heard her scream, if the rain hadn't delayed the schedule, she would be dead. Crushed into a block of metal. Gone. He thought about that for a long time. Pearl was rushed to a county general hospital, where doctors immediately began treating her for dehydration, hypothermia, and shock. Her wrists were bruised and raw from the rope. Her mouth was swollen where the duct tape had been. She was conscious, but barely. She kept drifting in and out, mumbling words the nurses couldn't understand. A nurse named Beverly Jackson stayed with her, holding her hand and speaking to her in a soft, reassuring voice. "You're safe now, honey. No one's going to hurt you. You're in the hospital. You're going to be okay." Pearl's eyes fluttered open. "My uncle," she whispered. "He did this." Beverly leaned closer. "Your uncle? What's his name?" "Ezekiel," Pearl said. "Ezekiel Thompson." Beverly wrote the name down on a notepad and immediately called the police. Within an hour, Detective Corinne Mitchell from the Special Victims Unit arrived at the hospital. Corinne was 41 years old, a veteran detective with 15 years of experience handling sexual assault and abuse cases. She had seen a lot in her career, but this case hit her hard. A 16-year-old girl, pregnant, left to die in a car crusher. It was one of the worst things she had ever heard. She sat down next to Pearl's hospital bed and introduced herself. "Hi, Pearl. My name is Detective Mitchell. I know you've been through something terrible, and I'm so sorry. But I need to ask you some questions, okay? Whenever you're ready." Pearl nodded weakly. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "He drugged me, my uncle. He gave me water and I drank it, and then I couldn't move. I woke up in that car. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die." "Your uncle's name is Ezekiel Thompson?" Corinne asked. "Yes," Pearl said. "He's my mom's brother." Corinne made notes on her pad. "Do you know where he lives?" Pearl gave her the address. Corinne nodded. "Okay, we're going to find him. I promise. You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." But even as she said the words, Corinne knew the investigation was just beginning. She needed evidence. She needed proof. A teenage girl's statement was important, but it wasn't enough to convict someone on its own. She needed physical evidence, witnesses, a timeline. The first thing she did was send a forensic team to Hartley's Auto Salvage to process the Taurus. They collected the rope, the duct tape, and samples from the car's interior. They took photographs of everything. They dusted for fingerprints. They bagged and tagged every piece of evidence they could find. Next, Corinne ordered a toxicology report on Pearl's blood. The results came back within 48 hours. Rohypnol. A high dose. Enough to knock someone unconscious for hours. Then Corinne started building a timeline. She interviewed Darnell Hughes and Evan, the 2 men who had found Pearl. Darnell described the moment he heard the scream, the way his heart had stopped when he realized someone was inside the car. "If I'd started that crusher," he said, his voice breaking, "she'd be dead. I almost killed her." "You didn't kill her," Corinne said firmly. "You saved her." But before Corinne could focus entirely on Ezekiel, another lead came in. A patrol officer had been asking around the scrapyard, talking to employees who worked there regularly. One of them mentioned a guy named Troy Woods who had been acting strange lately. Troy was 29 years old, a scrapyard worker with a criminal record. Theft, drug possession, nothing violent, but enough to make him a person of interest. Troy had access to the yard. He had been working the night Pearl was found. And according to one of his co-workers, Troy had left early that night, saying he didn't feel well. Corinne decided to bring Troy in for questioning. She didn't want to ignore a potential lead, even if her gut told her Ezekiel was the one responsible. Troy was brought to the station on a Thursday afternoon. He sat in the interrogation room, fidgeting with his hands, looking nervous. Corinne sat across from him, her expression neutral. "Troy, do you know why you're here?" she asked. "Because of that girl they found," Troy said. "But I didn't do anything. I swear." "You were at the scrapyard that night," Corinne said. "Yeah, but I left early. I wasn't feeling good. I went home." "What time did you leave?" "Around 7:15, maybe 7:30. I don't know exactly." Corinne leaned forward. "Did you see anyone else at the yard that night? Any cars that didn't belong?" Troy shook his head. "No, it was just me and Darnell, and I left before he started the night crushes." Corinne questioned him for 6 hours, going over every detail of his story, looking for inconsistencies. But Troy's story held up. He had left early because he felt sick. He had gone home and spent the rest of the night watching TV. His girlfriend confirmed it, and then the surveillance footage came in. The scrapyard had a single camera mounted near the main gate. It was old and grainy, but it captured everyone who entered and exited. The footage showed Troy's truck leaving the yard at 7:15 p.m., before Pearl had even been brought there. Troy was cleared. He wasn't their guy. Corinne went back to the hospital to talk to Pearl again. "Tell me about your uncle," she said. "Tell me everything." Pearl took a deep breath and started talking. She told Corinne about the gifts, the compliments, the way Ezekiel had isolated her from her friends. She told her about the night he gave her the soda that tasted off, the way she woke up in her own bed with bruises she couldn't explain. She told her about the pregnancy, the fear, the shame. By the time Pearl finished, Corinne had filled an entire notebook with notes. She knew now, beyond any doubt, that Ezekiel Thompson was their suspect, and she was going to make sure he never hurt anyone again. Detective Corinne Mitchell didn't waste time. The moment Pearl identified Ezekiel Thompson as her attacker, Corinne began building a case. She knew that without solid physical evidence, a defense attorney could tear apart Pearl's testimony in court. She needed proof. She needed a trail that led directly to Ezekiel. And she needed it fast before he had a chance to destroy evidence or run. The first step was obtaining a warrant for Ezekiel's phone records and financial transactions. Corinne filed the request with a judge, presenting Pearl's statement and the toxicology report showing Rohypnol in her system. The judge signed the warrant within hours. While the tech team worked on pulling Ezekiel's digital footprint, Corinne focused on the physical evidence. The forensic team had already processed the Ford Taurus at Hartley's Auto Salvage. They had collected the rope used to bind Pearl's wrists and the duct tape that had covered her mouth. Both items were sent to the lab for analysis. The rope was standard nylon, the kind you could buy at any hardware store. But when forensic analysts examined it under a microscope, they found something useful: fibers that didn't match the rope itself. These fibers were synthetic, consistent with the kind of material used in car upholstery. Specifically, the type found in 2010-2015 model Chevrolet trucks. Ezekiel drove a 2015 Chevy Silverado. The duct tape was even more promising. When analysts peeled back the layers, they found a partial fingerprint on the adhesive side, a print that had been protected from the rain and mud by the way the tape had been applied. The print was run through the system and came back with a match. Ezekiel Thompson. Corinne felt a surge of satisfaction when she got the call. They had him. But she wasn't done yet. She needed more. Next, she turned her attention to surveillance footage. Hartley's Auto Salvage only had one camera, and it had already cleared Troy Woods. But Corinne knew there were other cameras in the area. Traffic cameras. Cameras at gas stations and convenience stores. Cameras that might have captured Ezekiel's truck on the night Pearl was abandoned. She started with the route from Pearl's school to the scrapyard. She pulled footage from every traffic camera along the way. It took 2 full days of reviewing grainy, time-stamped video, but she finally found what she was looking for. At 8:12 p.m. on the night of the incident, a dark-colored Chevy Silverado was captured on a traffic camera heading south on County Road 47, the same road that led directly to Hartley's Auto Salvage. The license plate was partially obscured by mud, but the forensic video team was able to enhance the image. The plate matched Ezekiel Thompson's truck. 22 minutes later, at 8:34 p.m., the same truck was captured leaving the area, heading back toward town. Corinne now had a timeline. Ezekiel had driven to the scrapyard, stayed for approximately 20 minutes, and left. That was more than enough time to carry Pearl into the Taurus, bind her, and lock the door. But Corinne wanted to push further. She wanted to know what Ezekiel did after he left the scrapyard. She pulled footage from gas stations and convenience stores along the route back to his apartment, and she found something. At 8:47 p.m., Ezekiel stopped at a gas station about 10 miles from the scrapyard. The security camera inside the store showed him walking in, purchasing a bottle of Gatorade and a bag of chips, and walking out. He paid with cash, but the transaction was time-stamped on the receipt. Corinne obtained a copy of the receipt from the store's records. It matched exactly. Why would someone stop for snacks after attempting to murder someone? Corinne knew the answer: to establish an alibi, to create a paper trail that showed he was calm, normal, going about his evening like nothing had happened. It was a move that might have worked if Pearl hadn't survived. But she had. And now that receipt was evidence of his movements that night. The next piece of the puzzle was the drug. Rohypnol wasn't something you could walk into a pharmacy and buy. It was illegal in the United States, classified as a Schedule IV controlled substance. So, where did Ezekiel get it? Corinne handed the case over to the department's financial crimes unit, specifically a forensic analyst named Veronica Shaw. Veronica was an expert in tracking cryptocurrency transactions and dark web purchases. She pulled Ezekiel's bank records and credit card statements, looking for anything unusual. What she found was a pattern. Over the past 2 years, Ezekiel had been making small, regular purchases of Bitcoin through an online exchange. The amounts were small enough not to raise red flags, $50 here, $100 there, but they added up. Veronica traced the Bitcoin to a digital wallet, and from there she followed the transactions. 3 weeks before Pearl was found at the scrapyard, Ezekiel had made a purchase from a dark web vendor known for selling prescription drugs. The transaction was encrypted, but Veronica was able to decrypt enough of the communication to identify the product: Rohypnol, 20 pills, shipped to a P.O. box registered under a fake name, but tied to Ezekiel's email address. Corinne had him on drug possession. She had him on purchasing illegal substances with intent to use them in a crime. The case was getting stronger. But there was one more piece of evidence that sealed it: DNA. Pearl had told doctors at the hospital that she was pregnant and that her uncle was the father. A DNA sample was taken from Pearl, and a sample was taken from the fetus. Corinne obtained a warrant to collect a DNA sample from Ezekiel. When the results came back from the lab, they were definitive. Ezekiel Thompson was the biological father of Pearl's unborn child. The evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage placed him at the scrapyard. His fingerprint was on the duct tape. Fibers in the rope matched his truck. His financial records showed he had purchased the drug used to incapacitate Pearl. His DNA proved he had sexually assaulted her, and Pearl's own testimony tied it all together. Corinne sat at her desk, reviewing the case file one more time. She had everything she needed. It was time to bring Ezekiel in. Before you continue, a quick thank you to everyone watching and supporting this channel. Your presence truly keeps it alive. This community continues to grow because of people who believe in real, meaningful storytelling. Becoming a channel member unlocks exclusive extras, behind-the-scenes content, and directly helps us bring more powerful, true stories to light. Your support makes a real difference, and we'd love to know who's here. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. If you're still tuned in right now, write "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's watching till the end. Don't forget to like this video too. Now, let's continue. But before they could arrest Ezekiel, Corinne wanted to dig deeper into his past. She had a feeling this wasn't the first time he had done something like this. Men like Ezekiel didn't just wake up one day and decide to drug and attempt to murder their teenage niece. There was usually a history, a pattern, and Corinne was determined to find it. She started by running a background check. Ezekiel had no criminal record, no arrests, no convictions, nothing. But that didn't mean he was clean. It just meant he had never been caught. Corinne reached out to former employers, neighbors, anyone who might have information about Ezekiel's past behavior. And slowly, a picture began to emerge. In 2011, a woman named Angela Pritchard had filed a harassment complaint against Ezekiel when they worked together at a warehouse. Angela was 18 at the time. In her statement to HR, she said Ezekiel had made inappropriate comments about her body, cornered her in storage areas when no one else was around, and asked her invasive questions about her personal life. She said she felt uncomfortable and unsafe around him. The company had investigated the complaint, but Ezekiel denied everything. He said Angela was overreacting, that he was just being friendly. HR couldn't prove anything, so they gave him a warning and moved him to a different shift. Angela quit a few weeks later. Corinne tracked Angela down. She was 27 now, married, living in a different state. When Corinne called her, Angela was hesitant at first. But when Corinne explained what had happened to Pearl, Angela started crying. "I knew something was wrong with him," Angela said. "I knew it back then, but I was too scared to push it. I was 18. I didn't think anyone would believe me. And I'd heard stories about what happened to girls who reported stuff like that. They got labeled as troublemakers. They got fired. So I just kept my head down and left." Angela agreed to provide a written statement for the case. Corinne thanked her and continued digging. She found another woman, Isabella Winter. Isabella was 31 now, but in 2013, she had worked with Ezekiel at a different job, a logistics company on the other side of town. Isabella said Ezekiel had repeatedly asked her invasive sexual questions, described pornographic scenarios he wanted to recreate, and made her feel so uncomfortable that she eventually reported him to HR. But unlike Angela, Isabella's complaint went nowhere. HR dismissed it as a miscommunication. They said Ezekiel was just awkward and didn't mean anything by it. Isabella was told to give him another chance. When his behavior escalated, following her to her car after work, showing up at the coffee shop where she ate lunch, Isabella quit. She said she didn't feel safe anymore. Corinne called Isabella and asked if she would be willing to come forward. Isabella agreed immediately. "I've been carrying this for years," Isabella said. "I thought I was crazy. I thought I was overreacting. But I wasn't, was I?" "No," Corinne said. "You weren't." Corinne also spoke to several of Ezekiel's former co-workers, people who had worked alongside him over the years. Multiple people confirmed that Ezekiel frequently watched pornography on his work computer. One co-worker said Ezekiel used to talk openly about his sexual fantasies, describing scenarios that made everyone around him uncomfortable. Another said Ezekiel had been caught taking pictures of female employees without their knowledge. The pattern was clear. Ezekiel Thompson was a predator. He had been for years. And Pearl wasn't his first victim. She was just the first one who survived long enough to identify him. Corinne compiled all of this information into a supplemental report. She knew it wouldn't be admissible in court as direct evidence of what he did to Pearl, but it would help establish a pattern of behavior. It would show the jury that this wasn't a one-time mistake. It was who he was. With the evidence gathered, Corinne and her team prepared to make the arrest. They obtained a warrant and planned to pick Ezekiel up at his apartment early in the morning, before he had a chance to realize they were coming. But first, Corinne went back to the hospital to see Pearl one more time. The girl was recovering slowly. She was still weak, still traumatized, but she was alive, and she was strong. "We're going to arrest him," Corinne told her. "We have everything we need. He's not going to get away with this." Pearl nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Corinne squeezed her hand. "You survived. That's what matters. You survived, and now we're going to make sure he never hurts anyone again." Detective Corinne Mitchell sat in her office late one Thursday night, surrounded by case files and coffee cups. The evidence against Ezekiel Thompson was already strong enough to secure an arrest and likely a conviction. But something gnawed at her. Men like Ezekiel didn't just wake up one day and decide to drug their teenage niece, sexually assault her, and then try to murder her in a car crusher. There was always a history, always a pattern. And Corinne had learned over her 15 years in law enforcement that uncovering that history often made the difference between a good case and an airtight one. She had already run a standard background check on Ezekiel. No criminal record, no arrests, not even a traffic ticket in the past decade. On paper, he looked like a model citizen, but Corinne knew that paper didn't tell the whole story. She needed to dig deeper. She needed to find out who Ezekiel Thompson really was when no one was watching. What made this case even more disturbing was how well Ezekiel had hidden. When Corinne started interviewing people who knew him, co-workers, neighbors, acquaintances, she kept hearing the same descriptions. Quiet, polite, helpful, dependable. The kind of man who didn't cause trouble. His current supervisor at the logistics warehouse, a man named Vincent Carruthers, seemed genuinely shocked when Corinne showed up asking questions. "Ezekiel?" Vincent said, shaking his head in disbelief. "There's got to be some mistake. That man wouldn't hurt a fly. He's one of my best workers. Never late. Never complains. Always willing to help out when we're short-staffed." Vincent described Ezekiel as gentle and easygoing. "He's not aggressive at all," Vincent said. "I've never seen him lose his temper. Not even when things get stressful around here. He just keeps his head down and does his job." Other co-workers echoed similar sentiments. A woman named Brenda Mills, who worked in the same department, said Ezekiel was always respectful. He'd hold the door open for people. He'd say good morning. He never got in anyone's business. "Honestly, I'm having a hard time believing what you're telling me." But what surprised Corinne most was learning about Ezekiel's public persona when it came to faith and morality. Several people mentioned that Ezekiel attended church regularly, a small congregation on the south side of town. He wasn't loud about it, but he made it known. He'd mention Bible studies. He'd talk about sermons he'd heard. He'd even volunteer occasionally for church events. "He seemed devoted," said a neighbor named Donald Freeman, who lived in the same apartment complex. "I'd see him leaving on Sunday mornings with his Bible. He'd talk about faith sometimes if the subject came up. He seemed like a good Christian man, the kind who actually lived what he believed." What made Corinne's stomach turn was learning how Ezekiel reacted when crimes involving children were mentioned. A co-worker from the warehouse, a man named Curtis Daniels, recalled a conversation that happened about a year ago. "There was a news story about some guy who got arrested for hurting kids," Curtis said. "Ezekiel got so angry about it. He said people like that should be locked up forever. He said anyone who hurt a child deserved whatever they got in prison. He was really heated about it. I remember thinking he must have strong feelings about protecting kids." The mask was perfect. The performance was flawless. Ezekiel had constructed an image of himself as a moral, upstanding, God-fearing man who despised the very crimes he was committing in secret. Then Corinne learned something that made the case even more complex. Ezekiel had been engaged, a woman he'd been dating for nearly 2 years. When Corinne tracked her down and asked if she'd be willing to talk, the woman requested that her name not be revealed. She was devastated, humiliated, still trying to process what she'd learned. "He was the best man I'd ever met," she said, her voice trembling over the phone. "He treated me with respect. He was patient. He talked about our future together. He wanted kids someday. He talked about being a good father. How could I have been so wrong about him?" She told Corinne that Ezekiel never showed any signs of violence or aggression. "He was gentle with me, always. He never pressured me for anything. He said he wanted to wait until we were married because that's what his faith taught him. I thought I'd found someone special, someone decent." When Corinne told her about the charges, the assault, the attempted murder, the evidence, the woman went silent for a long time. "I don't understand," she finally whispered. "How is that possible? That's not the man I knew. That's not the man I was going to marry." But it was. Ezekiel Thompson was a master at compartmentalizing. He showed people exactly what they wanted to see. He played the role of the good man, the faithful Christian, the reliable worker, the loving fiancé. And behind that mask, he was grooming, targeting, and harming young women. Corinne dug deeper into his background, pulling old police reports. She found a 2014 incident where a neighbor had called the police to report suspicious behavior. Ezekiel had been seen watching children at a playground near his apartment complex. The responding officer, a patrol cop named Officer Ramirez, had questioned Ezekiel, who claimed he was just sitting on a bench enjoying the weather. The officer couldn't find any evidence of wrongdoing, so no charges were filed. The report was marked as unfounded and filed away. Corinne read the report multiple times. On its own, it didn't prove anything. But combined with everything else, it showed a man who had been testing boundaries, pushing limits, seeing what he could get away with. The most devastating discovery came when Corinne's forensic tech, Roland Price, finished analyzing Ezekiel's laptop and phone. Roland had spent 3 days combing through Ezekiel's digital footprint, and what he found made even seasoned investigators uncomfortable. Ezekiel's browser history showed frequent visits to pornography sites, many of which featured content that was disturbing but not illegal. But there were also searches that raised serious red flags. Searches like how to delete digital evidence, drugs that cause unconsciousness, scrapyard crusher accidents, and how long does it take for someone to suffocate in a confined space. These searches dated back weeks before Pearl was found at the scrapyard. They showed premeditation. They showed planning. Roland also found encrypted files on Ezekiel's laptop. It took him 2 days to crack the encryption, but when he did, he found hundreds of images. Most of them were screenshots from social media profiles of young women, girls in their late teens and early 20s. Some of the images had been edited, cropped to focus on specific body parts. It was clear that Ezekiel had been collecting these images for years. There were no images of Pearl, but there were images of other girls from her school. Girls Ezekiel had no reason to have photos of. Girls he didn't know personally. It was a collection, a gallery of potential targets. Corinne felt sick when she saw it. She had worked hundreds of cases, but this one was different. This wasn't just a crime. This was a predator who had been hiding in plain sight for years, grooming and targeting young women, pushing boundaries, testing limits, and escalating. And he had done it all while convincing everyone around him that he was a good, moral man who loved God and cared about protecting children. When Corinne showed the report to the district attorney, Simone Harper, Simone's face went pale. "This man is a monster," she said quietly, "and he fooled everyone. We need to make sure he never gets out." Corinne agreed. But there was one more thing she needed to do before they arrested Ezekiel. She needed to tell Winifred. Winifred had been living in a fog since the night Pearl was found. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. She kept replaying every moment, every decision, every time she had trusted her brother with her daughter. She blamed herself. How could she not have seen it? How could she have been so blind? Corinne sat down with Winifred in a small conference room at the police station. She laid out everything they had uncovered about Ezekiel. The suspicious behavior report from 2014, the disturbing searches on his computer, the collection of images, the fake persona he'd maintained for years. Winifred listened in silence, her hands clenched into fists on the table. When Corinne finished, Winifred looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know any of this. He was my brother. He went to church. He talked about faith and doing the right thing. I trusted him." "You couldn't have known," Corinne said gently. "He hid who he really was. That's what predators do. They hide, they manipulate, they build masks so convincing that even the people closest to them never see the truth. Your brother spent years perfecting that mask." "But Pearl," Winifred said, her voice breaking. "She's my daughter. I was supposed to protect her." "And you did," Corinne said. "You believed her when she told you. You're standing by her now. That's what matters. You didn't fail her. He did this. Not you." Winifred wiped her eyes, her jaw tightening. "I want him to pay for what he did. I want him to rot in prison." "He will," Corinne said firmly. "I promise you, he will." The arrest was planned for early morning, before the streets got busy and before Ezekiel had a chance to realize something was wrong. Corinne and her team arrived at his apartment complex at 6:15 a.m. on a Friday. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a pale orange glow over the parking lot. There were 4 officers in total: Corinne, 2 patrol officers, and a SWAT team member, in case Ezekiel decided to resist. They climbed the stairs to the second floor and stood outside his apartment door. Corinne knocked 3 times, loud and firm. "Ezekiel Thompson, this is the police. Open the door." There was a long silence. Then they heard footsteps. The door opened, and Ezekiel stood there in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair messy, his face confused. "What's going on?" he asked. "Ezekiel Thompson, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Pearl Dawson, aggravated sexual assault of a minor, kidnapping, child endangerment, and unlawful restraint," Corinne said. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Ezekiel's face went pale. "What? No, there's been a mistake. I didn't do anything." "Turn around," Corinne repeated, her voice firm. Ezekiel hesitated, then slowly turned around. One of the officers stepped forward and handcuffed him. Corinne read him his rights while they escorted him down the stairs and into the back of a patrol car. Ezekiel didn't say anything. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, his mind racing. At the station, Ezekiel was processed and placed in an interrogation room. Corinne let him sit there for an hour before she went in. It was a tactic she used often. Let the suspect stew, let the anxiety build, let them start second-guessing themselves. When she finally entered the room, Ezekiel looked up. "I want a lawyer," he said immediately. "That's your right," Corinne said, sitting down across from him. "But before your lawyer gets here, I thought you might want to know what we have." Ezekiel didn't respond. He just stared at the table. Corinne pulled out a file and opened it. "We have surveillance footage of your truck entering the road to Hartley's Auto Salvage at 8:12 p.m. on the night Pearl was found. We have footage of your truck leaving at 8:34 p.m. We have a receipt from a gas station 10 miles away time-stamped at 8:47 p.m. We have your fingerprint on the duct tape used to gag Pearl. We have fibers from your truck on the rope used to bind her wrists. We have a toxicology report showing Rohypnol in her system. And we have records of you purchasing that drug online 3 weeks before the incident." Ezekiel's face was stone. He didn't look at her. "And we have DNA," Corinne continued. "DNA that proves you're the father of Pearl's baby. DNA that proves you sexually assaulted her." Ezekiel's jaw tightened. His hands, cuffed to the table, trembled slightly. "So, here's what I'm wondering," Corinne said, leaning forward. "What were you thinking when you left her in that car? Did you think about what would happen to her? Did you think about the fact that she's 16 years old and pregnant with your child? Did you think about how scared she must have been when she woke up and realized she was about to be crushed to death?" Ezekiel finally looked up. His eyes were cold, empty. "I want a lawyer," he said again. Corinne stood up. "You're going to need one." Over the next few days, Ezekiel's lawyer, a public defender named Gregory Mills, tried to poke holes in the case. He argued that the surveillance footage was too grainy to definitively identify Ezekiel's truck. He argued that the fingerprint could have been planted. He argued that Pearl's testimony was unreliable because she had been drugged at the time of the incident. But the prosecution had too much evidence. The DNA alone was enough to convict him on the sexual assault charge. The surveillance footage, the receipt, the fingerprint, the fibers, they all told the same story. Ezekiel had drugged Pearl, sexually assaulted her, and then tried to kill her to cover up his crime. Gregory eventually sat down with Ezekiel and laid out the reality. "They have you," he said. "The evidence is overwhelming. The best thing you can do is take a plea deal. If we go to trial, you're going to lose, and the sentence is going to be worse." But Ezekiel refused. He insisted he was innocent. He insisted it was all a setup, that Pearl was lying, that someone else must have done it. Gregory tried to reason with him, but Ezekiel wouldn't listen. He wanted a trial. He wanted to fight. So they went to trial. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in February. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back row, their notebooks ready. Pearl's mother, Winifred, sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Pearl was not in the courtroom. She would testify later via closed-circuit video to protect her privacy. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Simone Harper, a woman known for her no-nonsense approach and her ability to connect with juries. In her opening statement, she laid out the case clearly and methodically. "This is a case about trust," Simone began, standing in front of the jury. Trust that was given freely and exploited ruthlessly. Ezekiel Thompson was not a stranger. He was Pearl, Dawson's uncle. He was the man her mother called when she needed help. He was the man Pearl had known her entire life, and he used that trust to groom her, to assault her, and ultimately, to try to kill her. Simone walked the jury through the timeline. She showed them the surveillance footage of Ezekiel's truck. She showed them the receipt from the gas station. She presented the toxicology report, the DNA results, the fingerprint evidence. She brought in Darnell Hughes, the scrapyard operator who had found Pearl, and he testified about the moment he heard her scream. "I thought it was an animal at first," Darnell said, his voice shaking. "But when I opened that door and saw her, tied up, gagged, soaking wet, pregnant, I knew someone had tried to kill her. And if I'd been 5 minutes later, she'd be dead." The courtroom was silent. Then Simone called Pearl to testify. Pearl appeared on a video screen, sitting in a separate room with a victim advocate beside her. She looked small and fragile, but her voice was steady. "Tell the jury what happened," Simone said gently. Pearl took a deep breath. "He gave me water. I drank it because I trusted him. I felt dizzy almost immediately. My vision blurred. I tried to say something, but I couldn't. And then everything went black." She paused, wiping her eyes. "When I woke up, I was in a car. It was dark. I couldn't see anything. My hands were tied. My mouth was taped shut. I heard a noise, like metal grinding. I realized the car was moving. I tried to scream, but the tape was so tight I could barely breathe. I thought I was going to die. I thought that machine was going to crush me and no one would ever know." The jury watched in silence. Several of them had tears in their eyes. "But then the machine stopped," Pearl continued. "And I heard voices, and the door opened, and I was saved." Simone asked her to identify the person who had drugged her. Pearl looked directly at the camera. "My uncle, Ezekiel Thompson." The defense tried to discredit Pearl's testimony. Gregory Mills argued that her memory was unreliable because of the drugs. He suggested that she might have been confused, that someone else could have been responsible. But the DNA evidence made that argument impossible. There was no confusion. Ezekiel was the father of Pearl's baby. That was a fact. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution presented over 50 pieces of evidence. They called 12 witnesses. They built a case so strong that even Gregory Mills admitted privately that there was no way to win. On the final day, Simone gave her closing argument. "Ezekiel Thompson had a choice," she said. "When he realized Pearl was pregnant, he could have confessed. He could have faced the consequences of his actions. But instead, he chose to try to erase her. He drugged her. He tied her up. He locked her in a car and left her to be crushed. He didn't see her as a person. He saw her as a problem. And he tried to solve that problem by killing her." Simone paused, letting the words sink in. "But Pearl survived, and because she survived, we're here today. Because she survived, Ezekiel Thompson will face justice." The jury deliberated for 47 minutes. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Ezekiel showed no emotion. He sat there, his face blank, his hands folded on the table in front of him. But inside, he was breaking. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, an older woman named Margaret Lawson, reviewed the case carefully before speaking. "Mr. Thompson," she said, looking directly at him, You committed one of the most horrific crimes I have encountered in my 30 years on the bench. You violated a child who trusted you. You attempted to murder her to hide your crime. And throughout this trial, you have shown no remorse, no accountability, no recognition of the pain you caused." She paused. "The law allows me to impose the following sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole for attempted capital murder, 40 years for aggravated sexual assault of a minor, 20 years for kidnapping, 10 years for child endangerment, 5 years for unlawful restraint. These sentences will run consecutively, meaning you will serve every single day of them. You will die in prison, Mr. Thompson, and that is exactly what you deserve." The courtroom erupted in quiet sobs. Winifred covered her face with her hands. Pearl, watching via video, closed her eyes and let the tears fall. Ezekiel was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But the story didn't end there. Pearl gave birth to a healthy baby boy 3 months later. She named him Isaiah. After much thought and many conversations with counselors and social workers, Pearl decided to place Isaiah for adoption. She chose a family through a closed adoption agency, a couple who had been trying to have children for years. They promised to love him, to raise him well, to give him the life Pearl couldn't provide at 16. It was the hardest decision Pearl ever made, but it was also the right one. Pearl spent the next year in therapy, working through the trauma of what had happened to her. She graduated high school with honors. She enrolled in community college, where she studied social work. She wanted to help other survivors of abuse. She wanted to make sure that other girls didn't have to go through what she went through. Darnell Hughes, the scrapyard operator who saved her life, visited Pearl in the hospital weeks after the trial. He knelt beside her bed and whispered, "Something told me not to press that button. I don't know what it was, but something stopped me." Pearl took his hand. "Thank you," she said. "You saved my life." Darnell shook his head. "No, you saved your own life. You screamed loud enough for me to hear you. That took courage." The community rallied around Pearl and her family. Fundraisers were organized to help pay for Pearl's therapy and college tuition. Local businesses donated money. Strangers sent letters of support. Pearl's story became a symbol of survival, of resilience, of the strength it takes to speak up and fight back. Winifred struggled with guilt for a long time. She blamed herself for not seeing what her brother was. But through therapy and the support of her daughter, she learned to forgive herself. She learned that predators are experts at hiding, that manipulation is their weapon, and that she had done the best she could with the information she had. Today, Pearl is 19 years old. She's in college, studying to become a counselor for survivors of sexual assault. She speaks at schools and community centers, sharing her story and encouraging other survivors to come forward. She's not defined by what happened to her. She's defined by how she survived it. And Ezekiel Thompson? He sits in a maximum security prison, surrounded by men who despise predators. He will never see the outside world again. He will never hurt another girl. He will die alone, forgotten, his name a reminder of the evil that can hide behind a smile. This case leaves us with questions that go beyond one predator and one survivor. How many other Ezekiels are out there, hiding in plain sight, trusted by families, working in our communities, preying on the vulnerable? Angela Pritchard and Isabella Winter came forward years after their experiences with Ezekiel, finally finding the courage to speak when they saw he had been stopped. How many women stayed silent because they feared they wouldn't be believed? How many predators moved through workplaces, families, neighborhoods, testing boundaries, grooming victims, waiting for the perfect opportunity? This story isn't just about one girl's survival. It's a reminder that predators rarely look like monsters. They look like uncles, coaches, mentors, neighbors, people we trust, people we let into our lives, and that's what makes them so dangerous. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you to pay attention to the people around you and the warning signs that are so often ignored, then share this video. Talk about it. Start the conversation. Because the more we talk about these cases, the harder it becomes for predators to hide. The more we believe survivors, the more survivors will come forward. And the more survivors come forward, the more predators will be held accountable. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support is what allows us to keep telling these stories. Your support is what helps us shine a light on the cases that need to be heard. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching.